Hey, Steve. So, in my last video, I ranted about kind of the authoritative, rule-based parenting, where it's a system-based approach, and it's the traditional view of parenting, where the parents need to set up a system of rules, and then they have punishments to keep the kids in line. And it's an externally based system, so it's externally motivated. And I pointed out a lot of different flaws regarding that system, where I felt like it's not the ideal way to develop kids' own independent thinking, their own convictions, and their own autonomy growing up. So in this video, though, I want to take kind of the reverse side, and I want to rant against the opposite, which is kind of this hands-off, kind of free-range, absentee parenting paradigm where you kind of let your kid do whatever they want. The reason why I want to kind of focus on this other paradigm or other approach in parenting is because I think a lot of times if people say, hey, parent without any rules, right? Parent without punishment, what happens is the natural thinking goes, okay, then I just do a hands-off approach, right? Where you just let the kids be and do whatever they want to do. However, I think this is equally as disastrous, if not more, than a rule-based or punishment-based approach. Fundamentally, it comes down to the fact that kids, because they aren't mature, meaning they're still developing in their brain maturity, they're still developing in their perspective, their values, their thoughts, their ideas, and how they understand the world. And because of that, they're not making the right decisions often. Right? They often will make not just mistakes, but they often get themselves into a situation where they're building habits which will lead to negative and harmful effects for themselves and for others. And so as a parent, to let your kid go dive into that and to let your kid just continue down that road without interfering, I think that's a big mistake. Let me give you an example. So let's say you have a kid and you tell them, oh, you can do whatever you want. You can study, you don't have to study, whatever. And the kids, obviously they're not going to study. And let's say they don't learn any math or anything. So they're like 12 years old and they barely know addition or subtraction, and they don't know multiplication or anything more advanced. Like, is that a great thing for the kid? And I would argue, no, it's not. Sure, you didn't have this authoritative, rule-based, punishment-based, parenting approach until then, and maybe the kid felt more free. However, the kid wasn't helped and guided in a way where they could be pushed and challenged and really grow, let's say in this case, in their mathematics skills, which is, I think, an important skill to have. And so it comes down to kind of this fundamental tension where kids on their own, actually any human on their own, they typically want to avoid discomfort, right? They want to go the easy way. It's kind of human nature in a sense, right? You don't want to do stuff that's difficult if you don't have to. So kids are similar. If you let a kid do whatever they want, they're just gonna either play all day or be on TV all day, go to what's easiest, most entertaining, most comfortable, not necessarily what's the best for them. And that's one of the reasons why I think just this hands-off parenting approach where, let's say, if you don't have any rules, you just let the kid do whatever they want to do, that's disaster in a way, because you're letting them just build up all these habits where it's not helpful and it can be very harmful to them and to others. So what's the alternative? The alternative, if you're not going to use rules and punishment in an external based system to kind of manage your child's behavior, then you're going to have to come alongside, and this is my opinion, that you're going to have to come alongside your child with a few principles in mind. First, you want to keep their autonomy. You want to keep their sense that they're making the decisions. You don't want to infringe on them and force them, and you don't want them to become resentful where they think that, hey, this is not what I want to do, but I'm just going to do it because this person's forcing me to do it. You don't want to ever get into that place where the child is building resentment and resistance to their parent or to someone who's trying to help them. So in that way, first off, you want to respect the child's own decision-making process and their power to make their own decisions, right? It is their life in a lot of ways. Another principle, though, you want to layer on top of that is they are extremely, and it depends on their age, of course, right? I mean, it differs if they're 3 or 5 or 10 or, older, but they're on this journey of maturity, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to be, in a way, needing a lot of help. And that's where I think as a parent, you need to come in and say, hey, I'm the person responsible over my child and where my child is headed, and ultimately decisions that my child makes. I need to be the one responsible that they are making the best decisions that they can. In other words, sure, you respect their decision making and their autonomy, but you put it upon yourself, and you put the responsibility on yourself for you to convince, to persuade, to help, to coach, to mentor, to make sure that they understand the ramifications of their decisions so that they're making the right decisions. And when your child is not making the right decisions, they're harming themselves or others, then you take it upon yourself as your responsibility to find a better way, another way, a different approach, a different angle to help your child. And you don't give up, and you persist until the child really is able to understand understand and see the objective reality of what's going on and the harm that's being caused, and he's able to choose a more wise, better path with where he's headed. And I think this is an extremely challenging thing because it takes a lot of skill. Like a parent to be able to come alongside, respect the child's decision making and autonomy and all this stuff, but yet to persuade and convince and help understand the objective reality of the implications and the effects and cause and effect and consequences of the decisions and the habits that they're making right now, and to help the child understand that across different time frames, whether it's like today, a week, a year later, 10 years from now, and to speak to the child at their language, at their level, because at different ages, kids have different maturities, and their brain is developing in different ways, and so they're understanding things differently. And so to have the patience to be able to speak to your child in different ways, in different angles, in different approaches, not to give up, to persist, and for the parent to take that responsibility and to push themselves to think better, to try better, to come up with more creative ideas to help the child. That takes a lot of skill. It takes a high standard for the parent's own behavior. And it takes a lot of responsibility for the parent, I think, to come alongside the child and to be able to do that type of approach. I think one of the most difficult aspects of this is, let's say when a child is engaging in some destructive, harmful behavior, whether it's they're fighting with their sibling, they're being resistant to something, the typical tendency for a parent is to place the responsibility on the kid and say, don't you know better? Like, stop it, do this, and to kind of have this authoritative, commanding, you stop it, you know better, you should do this. And it's interacting with the child from the parent's perspective. Like the parent's perspective, the child should not be doing that. They should be choosing something different or better in their perspective. And the parent starts to talk down to the child with that perspective, expecting the child to change, right, and to agree with their view. However, and this happens sometimes with my wife, where like she might go into this natural reaction where she's just like talking to the kids from her perspective, telling them what to do, but the kids are like, wait a minute, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like for me, it makes complete sense of why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? Or else, think about it, a kid's not going to do what they're doing unless it makes sense to them. Like they're getting some benefit. It makes sense in their worldview. And so for the parents to say, hey, what are you doing? You're doing everything wrong. You can't assume the kid is understanding any of that, because for the kid, they're doing something because they're getting the benefit, some benefit that makes that decision a worthwhile decision. Sure, the kids might not be able to, at that moment of time, understand the ramifications of their decisions impact, or their actions impact toward other people at that time, but also perhaps the impact on themselves and others over time, right, over different time frames. So that's the difference. A parent can see that because they have more maturity. A child, they're maybe hyper focused on a narrow angle and like, this is beneficial to me, right? And that's why they're engaged in that behavior. And so I tell my wife often, I'm like, hey, it's your responsibility to put yourself in the kids' shoes and to explain from their perspective, right, how that is harmful, not beneficial, destructive to themselves or to others in some angle that they can understand, and then they can come to their own conclusion that, oh yeah, that's not a great thing to do, and they can naturally correct themselves, right? But it's up to the parent to have that skill, that patience, but also the proximity, right, to be able to be close to the child where they can actually catch certain things and really step alongside with the child and explain it in a way where the child can understand, right, its implications across multiple time frames, or whatever time frame the kid needs to understand more objectively, right, the impact of their decisions or actions. So that's kind of, I think, one of the most challenging things is it requires a high bar for parents to be present, to be patient, but also to have high skill of being able to communicate with their child and present things in a way where the child can understand, like from the child's perspective, and they can start to reframe, right, the decisions. A lot of this is actually about reframing, where the kids have a certain framing of how they view the world, how they view their actions. Let's say a child says, this is mine, and to their sibling, they're like, forget, you can't play, get away from here, right? In a way, it's a framing problem. See, the kid is framing the situation where in this moment, it makes sense. He wants to play with this toy, and he doesn't care about anything else. But objectively speaking, this is a very narrow-minded and harmful kind of view, because you need to take into consideration the impact of your decisions and actions on other people, right? But not just that, not just on other people in the moment, but over time, like what type of results or consequences will this kind of action sustained over time result in over many years. So for example, with a sibling, if you're constantly just like pushing them away, refusing to play, the natural result, right, is they're not going to want to be around you. And you might have a week, a month. Think about 1 or 10 years down the road, this could really lead to some really terrible, consequences. And the kid at that moment, they're not attuned to those consequences because the framing of their whole situation is framed on, let's say, just this moment in time and just the pleasure of controlling, right, this playing time with this object. Like that's what they're focused on. And so the job of the parent is say, hey, not to scold the kid, not to give punishments and lash out and do all this crazy stuff, and not to shame the kid. That's the thing. One of the things I think is not helpful is you shame the kid. You say, you're a bad kid. How could you be so selfish, right? That's terrible. The kid isn't being selfish in that moment. The kid is just, because of their brain development at that age and because of the lack of training at that age, which is normal for kids, they're not able to see the full consequences of their actions and habits over time. That's natural. They're not being so-called selfish or bad kids right there. It's more the parents need to take it up on themselves to say, hey, this is my responsibility to help my child reframe the situation where they're not just looking at it through a narrow lens of just me, this object, I play, my sibling is out of this picture. Rather than that, they're reframing this as like, hey, I can play with this, but think about how this can affect my relationship with my sister or my sibling, let's say 10 years, 20 years from now, or even next week, right? And to present it in a way where the kid can change their perspective. Once they reframe, right, the problem or the situation, and the kid's able to get more information, more objectivity, and see the consequence of their habits over to different people over different time periods, then they're able to factor in more information, and then they're able to come up with their own conclusion. They're like, what am I doing? Why am I trying to push my sibling away and not play with them? That doesn't make any sense, right? This is my only sibling, let's say I have my best friend. I should want to play, and this is investing into the future of our relationship. I want a great relationship with my sibling over the next 30, 40 years or something. And once a child can factor that in, then they're going to make their own conclusions, their own decisions, like, hey, let's play together, right? And the amazing thing about this type of approach is once the kid starts to internalize, right, let's say that different reframing, then they're able to adopt that reframing in other situations and kind of cross-apply that type of reframing in different situations, and they can do their own problem solving. Sure, it's not going to be perfect. They're going to need a lot of help because, hey, they're kids, right? That's the point. They're growing, right? We're here to help them. But the cool thing is once you seed a reframing, that reframing is like gonna bear a lot of fruit, meaning it's another tool the kid has where they can start to see things, meaning their perspective are being developed. They're entering into maturity, meaning they're maturing in their decision making. And I think the process of doing this hundreds or thousands of times over many years, right? Reframing, right? Helping our kids see different perspectives, more full perspectives, greater objectivity leads to the process of maturity and wisdom developing where they're the ones, they still feel they're in control. They still feel they're making decisions, but they're able to assess the objective reality much more clearer, faster, with more confidence and make those decisions because they understand the benefits and the consequences, let's say the good and the bad of all their choices out there for themselves and to others, right? And they're able to make these complex decisions, but very confidently and clearly. And that's in a way what I call conviction. That's what I call confident, right? Men and women who understand what they believe and they understand the decisions that they're making and why they're making. And that's, I think, the type of men and women we're trying to bring up as parents. So as a parent, I feel deeply responsible for my kids and the decisions they make and the actions, right, they pursue, and especially the habits that they're building, because this has direct consequences on the trajectory of their lives. And it's going to bear a lot of effect, a lot of fruit or consequences in the future. So if my kid is making bad decisions, meaning they're entering bad habits, I'm not one to just sit around and say, oh, I'll let my kid just experience whatever and let the consequences themselves like teach my kid. I mean, sure, that's what we're expecting as adults, right? Consequences teach us. But as kids, the reason why kids need parents is so that parents can help their kids kind of shortcut the harsh reality of consequences teaching the kids everything. Meaning, if kids have to rely on consequences to teach them everything in life, we're talking about years and decades of just hardship and terrible experiences for them to learn everything that they need to learn. See, the point of parents, and the reason why parents can be such a blessing to a child, is that parents can shortcut a lot of that by imparting wisdom, right? Imparting the right decisions, imparting the right perspective, the right value, the right paradigms. And through that impartation from the parents to the kids like get earn an immense amount of efficiency in their life. They're able to kind of almost jump across and skip a lot of perhaps the painful lessons that other people might have to learn over years, or who might never learn, let's say. But the point is, through wise kind of parents who are there to nurture and really impart values and perspective, the kids have an immense amount of benefit in their lives, and they're able to pass that down also to their kids, but also to other people. So as a parent, I do take strong responsibility over my kids and the decisions that they make, the habits they're building, what they're doing, what they're learning. So for example, over their curriculum, I'm very, very hands-on. And if they're, for example, not wanting to do math, not wanting to do spelling, not wanting to do writing, or something that I think is very important, I'm taking that as my responsibility, meaning I'm not shaming my kids. I'm not trying to force them. What I'm doing is I'm first saying, okay, this makes complete sense in their perspective, right? I'm transporting myself into their perspective, but then at the same time, I'm bringing as much wisdom and objectivity into that situation where I'm trying to help the kids reframe, right, the problem, or reframe what they're looking at. For example, if it's they don't want to write or something, they don't want to do spelling or something, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to see how I could present, right, the benefits of spelling, right, the consequences of not knowing how to write at all, but also perhaps, what can be some more enjoyable ways to learn writing. And I take that upon myself really to see, like, how can I take my kids from point A to B, right, where they don't want to write, they don't like to write, they don't see the benefits of writing, and how can I take them from there to point B where they understand the benefits of writing, they're on board, they want to do it, and they're getting into this flow state where they actually enjoy it, and they're growing tremendously, and they see their progress. Like, how can I take my kids from point A to B? And I take it on myself, and I say, that's my responsibility, right? I don't put it on my kids where I say, hey, it's your responsibility. You figure out how to write. You figure out how to do this. You figure out how to like to do this. Like, they're kids, right? And that's the whole point. Like, they need their parents' help to be able to get through difficult situations. They need their parents' help to problem solve, to be able to overcome some things, to get the wisdom from parents so that they can, understand how to navigate, right, difficult challenges. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm taking it upon myself to help my kids through difficult situations, making sure that they're actually building the right habits, to make sure that they're going in the right direction. This is by no means this hands-off, like, because it's no rules, no punishment, they do whatever they want, and I don't care what they do because, I hope and pray that things will work out. No, it's not like that. If I'm not hands-on, let's say there's no rules and no punishments, and I'm not really hands-on, like with this approach of really taking responsibility for their decisions and their actions and their, where they're headed. If I don't have this approach, I'm just hands off. Like, I don't know, like, what's the point of being a parent? Like, I don't understand. I mean, sure, I provide for their food and the roof over their house or whatever, but if I'm not going to impart wisdom, and I'm not going to share values, I'm not going to help them problem solve, like, these daily decisions that they're making, like, that's a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. I think for parents to come alongside and to jump in and to jump into life with their kids, right, and to hold responsibility where they're laid up at night. Like, for example, at night, a lot of times I'm thinking, like, how can I help my kids in this area? Like, I see their perspectives, perhaps they need adjusting, they need reframing. Maybe it's like it's leading to some resistance, or they don't like to do something. So I'm putting myself in their situation, thinking, how can I up my game? How can I up my persuasion? How can I up the activity itself to make it more enjoyable? How can I, do something where it could reframe and help them kind of change the course, right? And that's a lot of what I think, at least my parenting is all about. It's about me figuring out how I can up my game and how I can come up with solutions, better ideas to help my kids reframe and make better decisions. All right, another area that this plays out, I talked about a bit of education and curriculum, let's say with math or writing or spelling or all this stuff that, yeah, kids might not naturally want to do, right? And it's my responsibility as a parent to try to come alongside my kid and reframe and find ways to make it interesting, to get buy-in, right, while respecting, right, the kid's own autonomy and decision making. Another area is, like, let's say the relationship between siblings themselves. I take it as my responsibility to be like the guardian of their relationship between each other. My kids are 7 and 10 right now. And if my kids have a problem between each other, I take it super, super seriously. Like, that's my responsibility. My responsibility is to ensure that my kids are not just getting along, but my kids are best friends, that they're loving, like, playing together, they're having fun, like, the relationship is awesome. Like, I want to see that, and if it's not happening, that's my responsibility. I need to figure out how to fix things to ensure that that's happening. contrast that to a different approach where you're just kind of scolding your kids, or you're just berating your kids, or you're shaming your kids, like, why are you fighting, why are you fighting, like, stop fighting. Again, the kids are fighting because from their perspective it makes sense. It's not that the kids are bad kids per se, it's just that they're getting a certain set of benefits in that situation from their narrow point of view, their narrow angle, their narrow framing. And for a parent to come along, they need to recognize that situation. It's not that kids are bad, it's like they have a certain framing of how they're viewing that situation, and that's what's leading them to make those decisions. And the kids need, and the parents need to come along and come up with better ideas, more creative ideas, more persuasive ideas to help the kids reframe and help reevaluate that situation so the kids can make better decisions. So with my two kids, if they're fighting, like, oftentimes we've built so much over the years in terms of perspective and reframing and all that stuff. Most of the time, they're able to just quickly resolve the situation and go back to playing. There are times where, maybe it's a difficult problem and the kids are fighting and it's lasting, let's say, 20, 30, 40 minutes or something, and it's getting heated. Then I'll step in and I will take it as my responsibility to try to help my kids reframe, right, the conflict going on, and help my kids steer and go in the right direction where they're reconciling and they're really seeing the value of reconciling. And I will go through, let's say, different time frames of for example, the consequences of, let's say, of conflict, right? What happens after, a month or 6 months or 12, a year or 10 years. And I'll also go through kind of the idea of, like, hey, what happens, like, in conflict when sometimes you might have to compromise, right, and not get everything you want, but you do that because you value, right, the longer term, let's say 5 or 10-year consequence of this relationship, meaning you want the relationship over time to be awesome. So I will be doing, like, a lot of these different type of reframings and discussion, and basically it's coming alongside my kids and problem solving with them. They have a problem, we're going to come alongside. We're not going to accuse each other of, being bad or all this stuff, but we're going to try to rethink the situation, try to think more objectively, more clearly about the situation so we could see it more clearly, so we can make better decisions. And I'm going to try to help reframe it so that ultimately they make the best decision. And if they're not making the best decision, hey, it's up to me to boost my game and to really try my best to find better solutions, better ways, right, to present and to communicate with my kids. All right, I've got a ton more just examples or things to go over, but I think I'll save that for some other videos. Go ahead, leave in the comments some of your questions or different situations, maybe some challenging situations you might experience with your kids. Let me know, and I can maybe give some feedback on how I would approach that situation. But again, in the bigger picture, if we take a step back, what I'm saying is that it's not about having this external system of rules and punishment and all this stuff. And it's not about this absentee kind of hands-off parenting where you just let your kids do whatever you want to do. No, rather, it's this thing where you let go of the external rules and punishment, but you engage in this very hands-on, high responsibility parenting where you're the person responsible, right, to communicate, to help reframe, to make sure your kids are making beneficial, good decisions for themselves and for others around them. And that takes a lot of energy and effort. It's very high skilled. It's not something that I think it could be taken lightly, but the results or the benefit is immense, because as kids are able to grow their perspective and their values, it's a skill that they learn very early on, and it compounds over time. They're able to make better decisions across multitude of areas and situations, and they're able to do that with confidence, and that gives them such a huge head start in life, where they don't have to experiment with, like, multitude or myriad of bad situations just to experience consequences because their parents didn't teach them when they were kids. Anyways, I hope that was helpful. Please check out my other videos on parenting. I'm putting them all on a playlist so you can kind of review them. They started like 4 years ago, and I'll go ahead and continue to try to make some parenting videos and expand this series. All right, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.